Hey there folks, Wrel here. Today we'll be going over some tips on how to fly the Valkyrie in Planetside 2. In my opinion, the Valkyrie can be a pretty good introduction to flying vehicles in general because it's super cheap at 250 nanites, it's not as fragile as a fighter, it has built-in safe fall, and it is also easy to fly in the most basic manner, but mastering it has a crazy high skill ceiling, so there is a lot of room for growth. We'll be mainly talking about flying the vehicle here, not so much about the loadouts, the strategies, or the effectiveness of the vehicle itself, but I do want to mention that the evasiveness airframe is pretty much the go-to for more skillful pilots, because the gains in agility are extremely high, while the hover airframe is a good pick for players who are just, getting into the vehicle or they don't feel comfortable with it, and the reason for it is that you'll see gains for the playstyles that aren't doing a lot of crazy maneuvering. Either one is a substantial cert investment though, so you don't want to commit to anything until you figure out whether or not you actually enjoy flying the Valkyrie in the first place. First and foremost, the Valkyrie is a transportation vehicle which you usually want to fly low to the ground and drop off passengers above capture points or enemy vehicles. There are other uses, but they go beyond the scope of this video. The defining feature of the Valkyrie in terms of flight is that its pitch down is extremely powerful compared to other vehicles, and in this way it'll let you literally fly circles around even ESF. Let's say that you're flying in a straight line, maybe you're about to crash into something, you can just roll to one side, you pitch down, which means you drag the mouse down unless you have your flight controls inverted, and then you hold spacebar. This is actually pretty similar to locking your thrusters in hover mode for ESF, but Empire-specific fighters can take longer to get into a hover state, and it's also more difficult to stay there. In a Valkyrie, however, there's a lot more flexibility. You can press forwards, you can press backwards, and either of them are going to let you do that 180-degree turn. It's pretty forgiving in that way. One thing that can make the vehicle feel weird though is that the center of gravity feels like it's above it. Liberators have a similar feel during certain maneuvers, and a good way to picture this is that you're more like a helicopter than you are like a VTOL, where the vehicle's frame is kind of just at the whims of the propeller above it. But let's back up for a little bit, talk about the fundamental mechanics. Valkyries do not fly well without the spacebar held down. You need to hold the spacebar because vertical thrust is what gives the Valkyrie the majority of its power, much like a helicopter's top-mounted propeller gives it all of its forward thrust. That being said, you do want to nose your face downward about 20 degrees in order to increase your speed. You can see in the footage the difference in speed between someone nosing down and someone flying straight. Interestingly enough, you gain even more speed if you roll slightly to a side, and you can still maintain a constant elevation. So you can think about those three stages of flight as the easiest to the most difficult, that being flying straight is the easiest, nosing down with thrust from the spacebar is, honestly it's still easy, but at least it's slightly more difficult, and nosing down with a thrust and a roll is the most difficult of the three. Passengers tend to get annoyed with my flying style when it comes to the Valkyrie because side gunners usually don't get angles on targets. But unless you're doing a very niche strategy like using a bunch of heavies with strikers or annihilators from the rumble seat, giving your rumble seat passengers angles on targets is kind of the last thing you need to worry about. From a combat perspective, only the forward gun matters. Well, the forward gun and the rumble seat engineers keeping you alive and dropping AT mines, but the tricky part about this is that the Valkyrie's weapon is forward facing, with some respectable left, right, and downward viewing angles. When you keep that in mind, you always want to have the viewing cone directed at your target, especially with a weapon like the Hellion, which has a long spin up. You need to keep a constant line of sight on your target without breaks if you can manage. Now sometimes this means hovering above your ground target, though that does put you at higher risk to return fire. Other times it means orbiting your target. Now to orbit a target, you want to roll to one side and then you hold the space bar and try to keep your chin pointed at the target as much as you can. You'll also need to occasionally tap A or D to adjust yourself depending on which way you're orbiting, point yourself to the sky a little bit more, since you do tend to sink a little bit, especially with evasion chassis equipped. Definitely go practice this and flying in general in the VR training room. Against enemy air vehicles, sometimes you'll need to be flying upside down, you'll need to be doing all sorts of craziness to deal with their maneuverability, but I'm not going to go into that because the maneuvers for it vary wildly, but the general intention is the same as fighting a ground target. You just keep your chin pointed at the enemy. Also, the Valkyrie's belly resists more incoming damage than the rest of the vehicle, so it's especially important that you keep a good angle. To evade enemy flyers, be sure to take advantage of the tight circles that you can fly by pitching down, and we did mention this earlier in the video, but it'll become more evident why that's actually useful when you're trying to juke ESF. I said at the start of this video that I feel like Valkyries are a good introduction to flying in general, and it's true, but I also don't think you should just pull one whenever you feel like it because, quite frankly, you'll get eaten alive. To practice your flying with the Valkyrie, which breeds skills that will come in handy later, when you take over a tower base and the Zerg is, kind of rolling onto the next base down the lattice, pull a Valkyrie from the air terminal, and then practice picking up stragglers who are hoofing it to the next base. If you need to grab people's attention, press the V key to open up the quick chat menu, then press the 0 key to call out for "I need a gunner." Again, if they're paying attention, you'll probably get some folks to jump on board. If you need to kick people out of the Valkyrie because they don't leave on their own, then press the page down key to bring up the vehicle locking menu, click on the radio button that locks the vehicle, and everyone will be dumped out. Just be sure to unlock the vehicle again later so that you can pick up passengers. Again, this is a good way for you to practice while following a Zerg around because it's a lot safer than just flying around on your own. You get to be helpful to the folks on the ground, and it'll teach you some really basic handling of the Valkyrie itself. Lastly, do not be afraid to jump out of the vehicle when it's about to die, because again, you and all of your passengers get free safe fall, so you won't die to fall damage. When you're on the ground, you can press the U key to redeploy and continue on your merry way. The more advanced stuff comes later, and it comes with a lot of practice, so definitely start learning now. If this video has been interesting, helpful, or entertaining, please feel free to like, subscribe, tell your friends about the channel, and if you have any helpful tips for flying a Valkyrie, you can leave them in the comments section, but just to reiterate, this video was specifically about flying the vehicle. It's not necessarily about its combat potential, since that's a whole different can of worms that we can address later. Thanks very much, folks. Wrel signing off.
I will redeploy to the ground dock.